I stood outside the cafe, hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of time. It was a soft autumn afternoon, the kind where dry leaves danced lazily down the sidewalk. But inside me, everything was stirring violently. My chest felt tight, like the years were pushing outward from my ribs, begging to be seen. Through the slightly fogged glass, I saw him, sitting at the exact same table where we used to share apple pie 50 years ago. He held the coffee cup with both hands, the same way he always did. His eyes scanned the street, calm, like someone who was still waiting. And I was there. After 50 years, I had finally come. I stood frozen for a moment, watching him. Would he recognize me? My hair no longer black, my skin mapped by time. The girl he loved was buried under decades of routine, silence, and sacrifice. But somewhere deep inside, she was still there. And right then she was wide awake, whispering, "Go. He's still here. He was. My name is Helena." And when I was 19, I believed love was enough, that if you gave your whole heart and stayed true, things would somehow work out. I believed that because I loved Daniel. He was the kind of man who made you feel like the world had poetry again. He worked at a dusty little bookshop down the street. He had a voice like velvet and a laugh that made strangers turn their heads. He used to write me notes on the margins of books he lent me. "You have the eyes of someone who's already read the world," he wrote once. I still remember the ink, smudged slightly by my own thumb. But my mother thought he was a waste of time. He had no wealth, no future, no real family connections. She said love doesn't fill a fridge or pay the mortgage, and she had already chosen someone else for me, a good, practical man, my father's business partner's son, an engineer, clean-cut, cold hands, a heart trained to beat only when necessary. One day, Daniel vanished. No goodbye, no letter, nothing. I waited, but he never came. My mother told me to stop humiliating myself, said he'd probably run off with someone younger, or realized I was too naive for real life. And so I married the man she chose. I wore the white dress, took the photos, and swallowed my silence like medicine. But Daniel stayed with me. Not in flesh, but in the invisible weight I carried every single day. I never forgot the smell of old books, or the way he touched my name like it was made of glass. Time passed, and then something happened. Time didn't race. It dragged like heavy shoes on a tired floor. I did what was expected. I kept the house clean. I raised 3 children. I cooked meals I barely tasted. I smiled at dinners, clapped at birthdays, stayed silent during arguments that didn't need words. My husband, Charles, was never cruel. He was just absent, even when he sat right beside me. He kissed my cheek like someone clocking in at work. He held my hand only when others were watching. We never fought, but we never laughed either. It was a marriage of quiet maintenance, like dusting furniture no one ever used. The children grew, and with each year, they needed me less. Eventually, I became just mom in the background of their lives, a name in their phones, a holiday obligation. Sometimes I'd sit in the kitchen after everyone had gone to sleep, just staring at the wall, asking myself, is this it? When Charles died, I didn't cry, not out of coldness, but because I'd already grieved that marriage long ago. I was 71 when I stood at his grave. I remember holding a single white rose, not knowing what to say. Not because I lacked words, but because we'd shared so few truths between us. Our whole life had been lived in whispers. After the funeral, I began sorting through our things. Drawers, closets, boxes filled with decades of polite nothingness, photos where my smile didn't quite reach my eyes, anniversary cards he signed with "Warmly Charles," not love, not even affection. Just politeness. Then I found it. It was in a small box beneath a pile of winter scarves, a faded envelope slightly yellowed, sealed but unmailed. My name on the front, in Daniel's handwriting. My heart stopped. I sat down right there on the floor, fingers trembling more than they had outside that cafe. I opened it. Helena, I waited at the train station. I brought the tickets. I thought you'd come. I don't know what your mother told you, but I love you. I still do. If you want to be free, meet me at Café Roma on Sunday at 4. If you don't come, I'll understand. But I'll never stop hoping. It was dated the same week he disappeared. I never received it. I stared at the words until they blurred through my tears. My mother, she must have hidden it. She took that choice from me, the choice to run, to live, to love. And I had lived 50 years under the weight of a silence that wasn't even mine. I stood up, knees aching, but something inside me had just cracked wide open. I had to know if he was still out there. I had to go back. I hadn't taken a train in years. I bought the ticket with hands that trembled, but not from fear this time. It was something else. Anticipation, disbelief, maybe even hope. That dangerous, beautiful thing I hadn't felt in so long. The train ride was slow, passing through towns that looked almost untouched by time. I watched the trees blur by and thought of all the versions of myself that had existed since I last saw him. The girl who dreamed, the woman who endured, the mother who faded into the background. All of them were riding that train with me, heading toward something none of us thought possible. I didn't know if he'd still be there. I didn't know if he was married, or if he'd even remember me the same way I remembered him. But I had to see for myself, even if it broke me. When I arrived, I walked the streets like a ghost, retracing her old life. So much had changed. The bakery was now a pharmacy, the cinema had closed, the trees taller, the faces different. But the cafe was still there. Café Roma, smaller than I remembered, older, but somehow exactly the same. I stood outside for what felt like forever. Then I saw him. He was sitting by the window, a newspaper folded beside him, hands wrapped around a coffee cup. His hair was white now, his shoulders slightly hunched. But his eyes, God, those eyes. He hadn't changed them. I stepped inside. The bell above the door rang, a sound I thought I'd never hear again. He looked up. For a second, confusion passed across his face, a flicker, like a forgotten name returning. Then his expression softened. His lips parted. "Helena," he said, barely above a whisper. I nodded. He stood slowly. His hands were shaking. I didn't know what to do, so I just let myself be held. 50 years of silence collapsed between us like dust. Neither of us spoke at first. We just sat there staring. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." She took the letter. I would have come, but I didn't have to. He already knew. Somehow, in his heart, he had always known. "I waited that Sunday," he said, "for hours. I kept thinking maybe you changed your mind." "I didn't," I said. "I just never knew I had the choice." He smiled, a little broken, a little stunned, but it was still his smile. "I never married," he said quietly. "Never could quite give my heart to anyone else." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, like a field after the rain. Everything soaked in truth. We stayed in that cafe until the sun slipped behind the buildings and the waitress began stacking chairs. It wasn't dramatic. No rushing into each other's arms, no tears in the middle of the street. Just two people who had been paused for half a century, finally allowed to press play. He walked me back to a small inn nearby. We didn't hold hands, not yet, but something passed between us. Not heat, but warmth. Steady, gentle, the kind of warmth that doesn't fade when night comes. The next morning he took me to the old bookshop. It had closed years ago, but he still had the key. He kept it all, the shelves, the scent of paper, even a few of the books I used to read. He opened one of them and showed me a page. There was a note in the margin, "I'll wait for you no matter how long." I broke then, not with grief, but with gratitude. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to feel joy. Not the loud kind, but the kind that lives deep in the chest, the kind that says, "You're still here. You didn't vanish. You survived." We didn't rush into anything. We took long walks, cooked dinner side by side, talked about everything and nothing. It was strange, getting to know someone I already knew so intimately. The way he cut apples, the songs he hummed under his breath, the silence he offered when I needed it most. But something had changed in me. I started painting again. I hadn't touched a brush in over 30 years. My fingers were stiff, but my spirit wasn't. He watched me from the garden as I set up my easel. He never interrupted, just smiled like he was watching a part of me come back to life, and that's exactly what it felt like. For so long, I had been a shadow in my own life. A name on holiday cards, a voice on the other end of a birthday call. I had forgotten how to laugh with my whole body, forgotten what it meant to be looked at, really looked at, like I mattered. But Daniel never made me feel old. He made me feel alive. One evening we danced. No music, just the sound of the wind outside and his hand on my back. I hadn't danced since my wedding. That night I danced barefoot on the wooden floor of his home, a little clumsy, a little off rhythm, and completely free. In the mirror I saw us, two people with silver hair and wrinkled hands. But all I felt was lightness. It wasn't about turning back time. It was about finally stepping into it. It's been 2 years since I walked into that cafe. Sometimes I still catch myself looking in the mirror, wondering where that girl went, the one with stars in her eyes and paint on her fingers. Then I see her again, in the way I carry myself now, in the small smile that lives on my face without effort, in the way my hands reach for Daniel's without hesitation. We didn't rush into marriage. We didn't need to. At this age, you stop worrying about ceremony and focus on what's real. He calls me his compass. I call him home. My children were surprised when I told them. They didn't really understand. To them, I was already settled into the role of grandmother, widow, someone who sits quietly by the window with a blanket over her knees. But I am not that woman anymore, or maybe I never was. I had simply forgotten that I was allowed to want more. Now, every morning, I wake up beside someone who remembers not just who I am, but who I was. Someone who loved me before the world got loud and complicated, and somehow he never let go of that love, not even when I disappeared. Sometimes we walked together through the park, hand in hand. People probably see two old folks. What they don't see is the fire, still glowing quietly between us, the decades we lost, and the miracle that we found each other again, not in spite of time, but because of it. I used to think that certain doors only open once in a lifetime. But I was wrong. Some doors wait, some love waits, and sometimes the second beginning is more beautiful than the first. So if you're listening to this and you feel like it's too late for love, for joy, for anything that makes your heart beat louder, let me be living proof it's never too late. Time doesn't erase everything. Sometimes it just waits for you to catch up. If this story touched something in you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever let someone go? Or maybe, has life given you a second chance too? I'd love to hear what you've carried and what you're still waiting for.